consciousness, one, two, or many?
Hello. So I'm a philosopher, so I wanted to look a bit in this the different approaches to study of consciousness that scientists from other disciplines take and philosophers. As you know, now the main scientific methods are observation, experiments, and then the cognitive scientists, now the researchers into consciousness, explain these things, so consciousness in terms of neural computational processes now. But some philosophers, actually quite strong camp within philosophy, are expressing doubts about ability of these methods that cognitive science uses to explain consciousness. Yes. So I would like to say a bit more about this. What is this mystery of consciousness that everybody talk about? Then I will a bit mention the hard problem of that was introduced by David Chalmers. A bit similar is the explanatory gap that first was talked about by Levine, and this the first person perspective by Nagel, but I will not go much into this. So even this hard problem, I will just present it a bit and just start to say some things, because the time is very limited, about what I think how the cognitive scientists can approach this argument, this problem, and how can they proceed with their work. So first of all, we all know that consciousness is this multifaceted and very complex phenomenon. There are many aspects of consciousness that you can research. Also, the terms consciousness and conscious are used in very different ways. For example, in everyday life, you hear that an ill friend regained consciousness, for example, that certain activists try to raise the political consciousness of the working class, or warn about the dangers of consciousness-enhancing drugs. So you can also enjoy reading a book in which the main character is at one point very conscious of the sound of the howling wind and very familiar with conscious efforts to give up some harmful habit. No? These are all the use of the same word, but means different things. So in ordinary uses, first, originally the word meant knowledge or awareness, whether collective or individual. Then in the 17th century, the philosophers especially started to use this consciousness more as meaning in inner awareness of our own mental states, no? So that you are like monitoring some kind of a sense organ for inner awareness, so inner mental states. And then of course you have the distinct field of experience, how it feels to experience, I don't know, looking outside the window, this subjective aspect of it. And then of course in science you have many different ways. For example, in medical profession, the clinicians think that a patient is conscious if he is able to respond appropriately to external stimulation. Then you have a bit more strict, demanding definition, awareness of oneself and one's surroundings, and ability to respond to and interact with the environment. So this is only a couple of mentioned. There are many more. So important thing is that this research is interdisciplinary, and maybe so every discipline has some different interests in this, different methods, so this already complicates things. But cognitive scientists, mainly these fruitful areas, the approaches are that they're looking into differences between conscious and non-conscious information processing processes, and then looking into these differences to determine what is this about consciousness. Now, here you have these priming experiments who are very useful, and of course certain brain damages when you look at the patients, how they behave when they have certain brain damage, and that reflects in their conscious functions. So the main thing that cognitive science are interested in is what is the function of consciousness, and they're of course also looking for neural correlates of this. Of course, they're not only interested in human consciousness, but also animal consciousness and artificial intelligence and so forth. So when you have such a complex phenomenon and people who are interested in different aspects, and even the word is used to mean different things, of course, first of all, you have to be very careful to say what you mean, what you're doing, exactly which aspect of consciousness you are researching. So this is one thing. Then the other one, so this mystery of consciousness that everybody talk about, we should then look into which part, which aspect of consciousness is the one that is so mysterious. So what is so mysterious is that we are all intimately aware of our consciousness, that what we are experiencing, but at the same time it's very difficult to describe, to say what it is. So this is supposedly this mysteriousness, very intimate but difficult to explain, especially in scientific terms, because we have this, now we're talking about this phenomenal aspect of consciousness. So how does it feel to experience something? This, we call it also qualia of these experiences. How to explain these in scientific terms, because science, as you know, uses these objective methods, third-person perspective. Well, here we are talking about first-person perspective, how it feels to us, so from within. How to get to this. As Nagel said, there is some subjective way that world appears to a creature. How to catch that? He has this article about the bat. I don't know if you read it. So how can science get to this? This is this specific idea. Then more general idea is how to explain this link between the consciousness and the brain, which clearly exists. How to explain this, what is the link between? Is it how, for example, these naturalistic philosophers will approach this question by asking how does consciousness experience arise from brain processes, so in what way? And then the next question, why? Why do we even have it? What is its function? So now we go to this hard problem of consciousness that Chalmers posed. So he says consciousness is not just about what consciousness does, so this function that we talked about, but also how it feels. And his point, if I put it very simply and clearly and in short terms, is that cognitive science, which uses these computational and neural mechanisms in terms of which it explains consciousness, so these conscious processes, is just getting to this what consciousness does. So it can catch its function, but it cannot catch this feel, so how it feels, this distinctive character of consciousness. So this phenomenal consciousness we talked about, or it can also be referred to subjective or qualitative consciousness. So this is, in his opinion, the hard problem of consciousness, because cognitive science, in his opinion, doesn't have the methods to explain this part of it. And then he says the other problems are the easy problems of consciousness, which cognitive scientists can solve once in the future. In principle, they have methods to do it, because all these other problems are about, to explain, is about function of consciousness. And then he enumerates I wrote there some examples so that you will know what he means by these easy problems, like providing explanation of the reportability of mental states is one. Then the other one is the ability of a system to access its own internal states, the integration of the information by cognitive systems. So he says these are all the psychological aspects of consciousness. So he divides these two things. Of course, this terminology that he used, the hard problem and the easy problems of consciousness, it's a bit unfortunate, because of course these other problems are not easy. They're not easy at all. I mean, he says that they're not easy. He knows that they're difficult. He also says that he just wants to say that in comparison to this, that this is just this comparative use of words. But of course, some scientists took it badly, like, wow, this is not easy, So maybe he could use a bit better terms. So this is a bit about this in principle. There are also some philosophers who say that he doesn't really have a basis to claim that these are easier and the other one are hard. But as I said, his point is that the first one cannot be, reached with a functional explanation. It cannot be explained functionally. So now he proposes another new terminology. He says that scientists or cognitive scientists, you often say, I will explain this mysteriousness of consciousness, and they start with saying this is the problem, this, now that we intimately know it, but we can't describe it, and then they go on and they end up in explaining some other aspect of consciousness, so these psychological aspects, as he says. So he says it would be the best if we would reserve the word consciousness only for this phenomenal aspect, and all the others we would call awareness. And he says there is a definition. Awareness is a state wherein we have access to some information and can use that information in the control of behavior. So this should be, all these aspects fall under this rubric, so they are about awareness. But here I would say, so now I'm coming to this, what I think about his, the hard problem. So he says that this is only for convenience, that he uses these two words, and that it doesn't have any substantial importance, but I think it does, because by saying that these are two different words, all of a sudden we get this impression we have different phenomena, not only aspects of one phenomena. And when you say that there are different phenomena, it's more easily to claim that if you explain one, you can't explain the other. Because if it's only aspect, you can't just say, oh, even if you explain all these one aspect stays, but this explanation will not help you in any way to explain this other part. Because if it's one thing, of course, explanation of other things will also help you in some way with this other aspect. But if you say there are two different phenomena, you can more easily say they're independent. Explanation of this will not help you with explanation of that. So this would be my objection to his division of these two things. So it becomes easier to claim now that you can divide them. So my point would be that he should offer a bit better additional explanation why he thinks that explanation of all the other aspects of consciousness will not help us with our phenomenal aspect, why he thinks that even if we explain all that, that will still stay unexplained. I mean, he has this explanation that that it doesn't have functional use, but given the fact that the research is still in the early stages, it's a bit difficult just to proclaim that he can't just proclaim that it doesn't have any functional use, this qualitative field of experience now. So this, it's a bit all that I have to say. So in conclusion, just to summarize, researchers need to be careful, clearly state which aspect of consciousness they are investigating. This is important, that you always have to be clear about that. Of course, we also have to take seriously Chalmers' claim that phenomenal consciousness cannot be explained in functional terms. So we always have to be careful about the methods we use, to scrutinize them a bit, think where do they get us. And on the other hand, as I said, there is no reason to despair, to think that his argument is definitive. And I think there is a good chance that functionalist explanation is still possible. As I said, we are still at the early stage of research, and we can't just make such rash conclusions. Thank you.
Hvala za predstavitev. Zdaj pa imamo čas še za vprašanja. Ja.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic. Yeah, it's a very interesting topic that you introduce, and of course there are many aspects. However, from the scientific point of view, I mean, we can explain what we can measure, yeah? And depending on which approach you are using, or either you are using computational sciences like artificial intelligence, or you are using neurobiology, yeah? So you are looking at the different aspects, yeah? And however, you cannot explain consciousness using only one approach, yeah? And however, not using macroscopic methods, yeah? So in that case, I mean, and you mentioned qualia, yeah? So in that case, we are going into the quantum aspects, yeah, which are or were approached also by physicists, yeah. So I think that here, I mean, it's very, I think that philosophy probably can approach more the subjective aspects, not the objectives that can be quantified, because philosophy is not using approaches where you measure something directly. It can be maybe assessed by experience, yeah, which is a very different approach. From the other side, I mean, we have the psychologists, yeah, where also the psychologists, from one side, they try to quantify, and they try to quantify in some cases, for example, I mean, the aspect which can be measured, yeah, using like EGM or those type of things. So in that case, you can get closer with the brain functioning, yeah. But nevertheless, I think it's not a trivial aspect, yeah. And each one.
What is that trivial aspect? Which one is not trivial? This psychology?
Each one of the approaches, yeah, each one of the approaches are giving some answer to the problem, but we cannot have a definitive answer using only one approach, neither from the philosophical, neither from the scientific one, and from the different disciplines, yeah. But nevertheless, I mean, I was pretty much impressed from the title, yeah, because you are talking about one or multiple, yeah. So actually, you didn't touch that aspect, which I think is very important, yeah. And I was thinking that maybe because what would mean to have multiple, yeah, consciousness? Because I think that consciousness, yeah, might go through different stages, yeah. Unless you have a multiple personality disorder or something like this, where each personality is associated to one state of consciousness, yeah, I think every human being can experience many different aspects, yeah, but it's coming from the same source, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for the comment. Was dat commentaar?
I mean, I can say something.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, of course. This is the thing, the study of science is interdisciplinary, So there are all these different disciplines that contribute something, and philosophy is one of them. But philosophy also has this role that it's somehow trying to integrate all these things and look at things from above somehow. That's why philosophers like to also look at the other disciplines and to say if those methods work or not. But I agree, it's a really interesting idea that you have to look at all of these things like one consciousness, I would say, but then you can say that you have different stages, of course. Also, you don't have every creature has developed all aspects of consciousness, no? You don't have, like, animals cannot introspectively look at their own mental states, let's say, no?
It's not correct. At least as far as I know, I mean, the consciousness is an aspect which is inherent to humans.
Oh.
All others,
Well, not necessarily so. Some scientists looking also into animals now, and that's why it's important to know which definition you use and what you think with consciousness.
but because from the medical point of view, I mean, what
Okay, yeah.
you need to have
Medicine
neocortex,
is, yeah.
And in order to have neocortex is throughout evolution. Yeah, neocortex, it was performed much more later.
Mm.
So if you look, I mean, evolution as a whole, yeah, and we look even, for example, as you mentioned, animals,
Mhm.
yeah, the higher ones, like the primates, which are the closest to us, and so on, they are much closer to us, but they don't have I mean, they have cortex, and many animals, for example, even the rodents, I mean, which are experimental animals, use also to address some of those aspects. But you cannot say that they have consciousness in the same way that I think also
Why not? What's your criterion?
is it's not my personal criterion.
No,
I'm talking from the evolutionary point of view that it
No,
was,
but-
this proposed.
But
From the Darwinian concepts and so on, is not my proposal.
Maybe she was thinking about rational thinking,
No,
confusing rational
self-reflection.
thinking and consciousness.
Self-reflection.
I mean, consciousness
Mhm.
in the sense of her definition, I don't see why not. That is one aspect of it.
Well, her definitions is not a trivial one, by the way.
There is
And
no
and
trivial
there are
definition of
trivial
consciousness.
Yeah, but in order to be able, to talk about consciousness, from the you need to have a structure. Yeah, and from you need to have a brain which has such a constitution.
Exactly, that's what I'm asking.
The brain is a very complex structure, and in the brain, you have many structures. One of them is the cortex. The
Yeah.
cortex is present in many animals,
Yeah.
from the not from the most primitive ones,
Mhm.
yeast and so on. They not have the structure. You need to have eukaryotes and above. Yeah. But in order to have consciousness, you need to have neocortex. And neocortex is a novel structure which appears throughout evolution, which is present in humans. That's a minor difference. Yeah.
But now you're defining consciousness
This is
in
No,
some
no,
way.
Yeah.
Like rational thinking.
And that's
Cortex
not
is related to
something
rational
that
thinking.
everybody will agree, so
But that's why I'm saying that you need to clarify what kind of consciousness you're talking about, because otherwise you get this kind of discussion. When somebody says something else, and nobody knows exactly what the other means by
Nobody's
consciousness.
talking about the same thing.
Yes.
So we are talking about different
That's why we're talking
consciousnesses.
past
That's
each
the point
other.
of this title. One or many consciousnesses. So what's the definition for consciousness? There is no consensus what consciousness is, and that's the point.
what
Yeah,
animals lack is this transition to the symbolic order. They still, in order to navigate in some sensible way in their environment, they need to have like abstract thoughts that some things are for something. They may not assign names to them. They didn't go into the symbolic order, but they know that holes are for hiding, trees are for climbing, various foods are for sources of food are for eating. They didn't give it names, but they still know how to navigate, and by this criterion they are conscious in some sense. Not self-reflective, not symbolic, but I would argue as a graduate of biology that some animals, that it's not just primates and then nothing, it must be a scale of some sort, and I would argue against your definition.
A scale or a
Anyway.
spectrum.
Yeah,
A
a
spectrum.
Yeah.
And I think then after you arrive at the conclusion that it's a spectrum, it is useful to arrive to make different spectrums based on the ability that they lead in. For example, face recognition can be its own spectrum. The understanding of three-dimensional spaces can be its own spectrum. So I think it is an oversimplification to bunch that everything up into one specter of consciousness.
Of course.
As you said yourself, it has many different states, even in humans. Why wouldn't it in animals? Then again, you know.
Thank you for your comment. If there are no other questions or comments, I think